My name is Ilara Vance. I'm a landscape architect in my late 20s, and my world was currently reduced to the cold, sterile air of a New England courtroom. This wasn't a place for flowers and natural light. It was where my family intended to bury me alive. Preston Vance. My older brother sat across the aisle, his tailored suit screaming arrogance, claiming ownership of everything my father, David Vance, had built. Next to him, my mother Dahlia looked impeccable in a cream suit, her expression glacial. They had already presented the forged will, the one that gave Preston 70%, Dahlia 30%, and left me the only child who cared for Dad in his final years, absolutely nothing. Judge Alistair Kincaid, a man whose attention seemed fixed on the opposing counsel, leaned back clearly favoring their lawyer's motion. The judge's body language alone signaled my defeat, forcing me into a desperate move. Preston then sealed the performance, addressing the room. The three Mansard roof houses, both Cadillac Escalades, and 70% of the company shares, are all mine, Your Honor. The judge and Dahlia stared at me, daring me to react. I didn't cry or plead. I pulled out a thin brown envelope and placed it on the table, not for the judge, but for them. I smiled, a slow, cold realization dawning in their eyes. Dad was quite interesting, wasn't he? I said, my voice cutting through the tension. Giving you 70%, Mom 30%, and me, nothing. This will answer everything. I didn't open the envelope. Instead, I reached into my coat pocket and slowly pulled out a single heavily engraved object. It wasn't jewelry or a key. It was my father's memorial pocket watch. I held the gold watch up high enough for them to see the personalized engraving on the back. A tremor of panic flashed across Dahlia's face, a genuine break in her perfect composure. They knew what it meant. What was it? If you're watching this story unfold, I'm curious. What time is it where you are? And what city are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below, so I know how far my story has traveled. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the ultimate family showdown. 6 months earlier, in the bleak light following a short, quiet funeral, the life I knew was officially pronounced dead. My father, David Vance, founder of Vance Construction, and the only person I truly trusted, had passed away peacefully in his sleep. I, Ilara Vance, thought I was prepared for the grief, but I wasn't prepared for the cold reception at the subsequent meeting. 2 days after we lowered Dad into the cold ground, I was summoned to a downtown law office, not the familiar office of Dad's longtime personal counsel, but the unfamiliar, opulent one of Clayton Bell. My mother, Dahlia, and Preston were already seated, a united front of expensive fabric and condescending silence. I took my seat and felt an immediate chill, the room's atmosphere far too formal and hostile for a family grieving. Preston, the newly appointed CEO, wore the mantle of successor with smug confidence. Clayton Bell, a silver-haired man I'd never met, skipped the pleasantries and got straight to the point. He announced that Mr. Vance had revised his will just weeks before his passing. Bell's voice droned on, detailing the distribution that erased my existence. Preston would inherit 70% of the company and all major assets, including the 3 Mansard roof houses along the coast. Dahlia would receive the remaining 30% of the company's equity and specific liquid assets. The final paragraph confirmed my deepest fear. To my daughter, Ilara Vance. I leave no material legacy, as she has chosen a path separate from the family business. My entire inheritance, my future, and my father's promises were worth nothing. It's quite clear, Miss Vance, Clayton Bell stated, pushing a copy of the official document toward me. Your father recognized the immense responsibility of managing this $80 million estate should fall to those actively involved in the operational side. No, that's impossible. I whispered, the paper shaking under my hands. Dad promised me the New England coast properties. He promised he would fund my landscape architecture firm. I looked at Dahlia, searching for any flicker of maternal warmth, a gesture of comfort. She met my gaze with an expression I suddenly recognized as pure calculation. Your father realized your skills are too artistic for hard business, Alara, Dahlia said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. You were always a dreamer, not a manager. Preston leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, a smirk playing on his lips. It's a lot of responsibility, sis. Don't worry, Mom and I will handle it. I need to see the original signature, I demanded, forcing the words out. The true legally notarized document. My father's handwriting on this copy doesn't look right. Bell shook his head, an air of mild annoyance replacing his professional facade. The will is properly attested, Miss Vance. Your brother and mother have been kind enough to even share this much detail with you. They are under no obligation to provide you with the confidential originals. The shock turned into a cold, hard resolve. The mother I had always believed was my biological parent, the woman who had raised me, was sitting beside her favorite son, actively and publicly disinheriting me. The emotional wound was deeper than the loss of money. It was the shattering of a lifelong lie about family. I stood ignoring the dizzying feeling of betrayal and looked straight at Dahlia. If this is the truth, Mom, then I will find a way to expose the lie that led to it. Dahlia simply raised an eyebrow. Good luck, Alara. Don't waste your time or hours. As I walked out, leaving the cold, silent conspirators behind, I knew my father hadn't done this. David Vance had been too clever, too protective. This was a setup, and I was going to find the evidence he must have hidden. I drove straight to the aging industrial park office of Elias Stone, Dad's longtime manager, the one person who knew the company's financial pulse. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly when I found Elias hunched over a desk littered with aging ledgers. Elias looked genuinely relieved to see me. They wouldn't even let me come to the main office. Alara, Elias said, his voice raspy. Preston's already brought in his own financial people. It's a total takeover. I cut straight to the core issue. Elias, did Dad sign a new will? The one that gives everything to Preston and Dahlia. He sighed heavily, pulling off his glasses. David's signature was on that paper? Yes, but I'm telling you, something felt wrong. He was lucid until the end, fiercely protective of you. He loved Preston, sure, but he wouldn't leave his own daughter destitute. Never. I agree. The coldness from Dahlia, it was calculated. She was too calm. Elias leaned closer, lowering his voice significantly. Listen, David was scared. I heard him talking about Preston over the phone with his real personal lawyer, Mitchell Hayes, just a few weeks ago. He was talking about seizing control, using the company money for private investments, and forcing a buyout. He didn't trust them, Alara. Not for a minute. My heart hammered against my ribs. Seizing control? Was he doing anything to protect the assets? Yes. That's the thing. David wasn't stupid. He told me he was moving the 3 Mansard roof properties and a significant portion of the company's non-voting shares into a contingent trust. Elias underlined the words with a shaky finger on the desk. A contingent trust isn't part of the regular will. It's an automatic transfer that takes effect upon a certain condition, usually the grantor's death, but it's legally separate from the probate process. But why would the trust not be mentioned in the will then? Because he set the condition to be something only you would know how to fulfill, Alara. That's my best guess. He must have left a physical key, a document, or a clue with Mitchell Hayes, or hidden it somewhere. Only you would look. Elias's eyes widened with sudden realization. He was worried Preston or Dahlia would try to hide any subsequent legal documents, so he secured the assets through this trust. He didn't want the will to reveal the existence of the trust, otherwise they would challenge it immediately. He scribbled a name and number on a piece of paper. You need to find Mitchell Hayes. David trusted him implicitly. If anyone knows the condition of that trust, it's Mitchell. I clutched the paper, a spark of hope finally piercing the gloom of my grief and betrayal. I was no longer fighting for scraps. I was fighting to unlock a hidden vault my father had built just for me. The very next morning, I drove to the stately brick office building housing the law firm of Mitchell Hayes. This was a place with old money and discretion, a far cry from the modern facade of Clayton Bell's operation. Mitchell Hayes, a man who looked like he belonged in a classic American movie with sharp eyes and a reassuring, quiet demeanor, listened patiently as I recounted the fraudulent will and Elias Stone's revelation about the contingent trust. He didn't interrupt, nodding slowly as I spoke about Dahlia's calculated coldness and Preston's greed. "I need to know the condition of the trust, Mr. Hayes," I concluded. "And I need to know if you can verify that my father was of sound mind when he created it." "Ilara, I cannot legally disclose the specifics of the trust condition to you at this moment," Mitchell Hayes replied, his hands folded neatly on the mahogany desk. "But I can confirm two things. First, David Vance was absolutely sound of mind when he established the trust. In fact, he was meticulous. He knew exactly what he was doing, and his actions were premeditated against a potential hostile takeover. Second, I can tell you that the key to unlocking that trust is a physical object that your father entrusted to you, a sentimental object that he knew Dahlia and Preston would never think to look at twice." I thought instantly of the objects my father had given me over the years: a worn compass, a leather-bound journal, but most importantly, my memorial pocket watch. "Was it a gold pocket watch?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mitchell Hayes's eyes flickered, the only indication of confirmation. "I can't say, but David had a particular fondness for that piece. He said it carried more than just time. He also gave me the key to his old study desk, the one that's still in the house." I mentioned, realizing the old desk held sentimental value but also served as a secure place. Hayes nodded slowly. "That desk key and the object itself, those are your mechanisms. But Ilara, David Vance left you more than just a path to his money. He left you a truth he couldn't speak when he was alive." He paused, looking me straight in the eye, the gravity of his words sinking in. "Your father was not merely protecting his assets. He was protecting you from a lie that went to the very core of your family structure." The lawyer then reached for a small sealed envelope. "David insisted that if you came to me with questions about the trust, I was to give you this. It's a short note, just a single non-legal clue to the object's exact location written in his own hand, and a warning." I tore open the envelope, my hands shaking. Inside was a slip of paper with a cryptic inscription: "The beginning of forever is always hidden where the time stands still." Underneath, Dad had scrawled a single name: Vance. I stared at the note, my mind racing. I knew I was about to uncover a deeper, far more devastating truth than a forged will. Mitchell Hayes's hint about the family structure echoed in my mind. Was Preston really my brother? Was Dahlia really my mother? The name Vance felt like a punch to the gut, a question of who truly belonged to the family legacy. The inscription from my father's note: "The beginning of forever is always hidden where the time stands," still haunted me, all the way back to the main house. I knew the words weren't about a clock. They were about sentiment, about beginnings. The key to the study desk was in my hand, and I drove straight there. The study, located in the west wing of the largest Mansard roof house, smelled precisely like dad leather, old books, and expensive Cuban cigars. I unlocked the heavy oak desk and systematically went through every drawer, finding only financial reports, old family photos, and meaningless correspondence. Defeated, I looked up at the wall where a gallery of family photos spanned 40 years. My eyes stopped at the one photo that was perpetually out of date, a picture of Dad and me on my 16th birthday, the day he gave me the memorial pocket watch. I realized the watch wasn't the clue. The watch was the container. But where was the watch now, where the time stands still? My gaze fell on the mantelpiece above the fireplace. Unlike the ever-changing photographs, Dad had always kept the mantelpiece precisely the same, the time on the pendulum clock always set wrong, a personal joke about his dislike for schedules. And there, sitting next to the clock, nestled against a small bronze ship, was my memorial pocket watch. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The gold casing felt heavy, familiar. I opened the front cover expecting the ticking movement. Instead, I found the internal mechanism had been replaced entirely. There was a small, intricately carved cradle holding a tiny, almost invisible Vance microSD card. It was exactly what Mitchell Hayes had alluded to. I quickly used a small tool I had brought along to carefully extract the chip. I didn't want to use the house computer Preston might have installed spyware. I rushed to a cafe far from the property and slipped the chip into my personal laptop using an adapter. The drive was heavily encrypted, but there was a single non-encrypted text file named Access. It contained a single line, the anniversary of the day I stopped drinking, October 14th, 1994. It wasn't my birthday or any obvious family date. It was a deeply personal date a secret dad had shared only with me. That was the password. The encrypted folders opened and the evidence exploded onto my screen. There was a folder marked Financial Audit. Inside were internal documents revealing a systematic scheme. Preston, with Dahlia's signed approval, had illegally funneled $750,000 USD from the company's emergency reserve fund into offshore accounts 6 months prior. This was not just a legal challenge, it was fraud. Another folder, Audio Logs, contained a file named Final Talk. I played it. It was Dad's shaky voice recorded secretly in his study. I know what Preston and Dahlia are planning. They think I'm too weak, that I didn't see the transfer of those funds. They think they can force me to change the insurance policies. I need to protect Alara. I have to secure her legacy, her future, before they destroy everything I've built. I leaned back, tears blurring my vision. He knew. He died knowing their betrayal. But the most chilling discovery was in the final folder labeled Vance Genealogy. Inside was a digitized report, a DNA test result, and an old adoption paper. The adoption paper confirmed that Preston Vance was the biological son of Dahlia, but not the son of David Vance. The DNA test was the proof. I sat there, the weight of the massive lie I had lived under my entire life, finally crushing me. Dahlia was my stepmother. Preston was my stepbrother. They had spent decades masquerading as my family only to steal my inheritance and leave me with nothing. The next morning, armed with the undeniable truth stored on the Vance microSD card, I secured the services of Ava Sharma. Ava was a sharp, no-nonsense litigation specialist known for handling complex corporate fraud cases, exactly what I needed. We sat for hours reviewing the financial audit logs, the audio confession, and the adoption papers. Ava's expression remained calm, yet her eyes narrowed with professional intensity. "This is a clean sweep, Alara," she concluded, placing the documents neatly back into a sealed file. "We have fraud, elder abuse, manipulation of corporate funds, and strong evidence to invalidate the will and activate the contingent trust. We also have the final blow, the parentage fraud. We'll save that for the courtroom." My legal battle was secured, but I still needed emotional closure. I knew I wouldn't forgive them, but I needed to face them one last time outside the formality of court. I drove back to the largest Mansard roof house that afternoon, finding Preston and Dahlia in the drawing room already celebrating their assumed victory. "Look who decided to crawl back," Preston sneered, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Did you come to beg for the $10,000 we decided to throw your way?" "I came to tell you to enjoy your last few days of borrowed wealth," I replied, standing tall in the doorway. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice the $750,000 USD missing from the company's emergency fund?" Preston dropped his glass slightly but quickly regained his composure. "That was a temporary liquidity transfer for a private investment, Ilara. Perfectly legal." Dahlia, however, was visibly shaken, her perfect facade cracking for the second time since the will reading. "Where did you get that information? That's internal data." "From the man who knew exactly what you were," I said, my voice ice cold. "I have Dad's last words on a recording, Dahlia. He knew you were planning to ruin me. He knew everything." I didn't mention the parentage, saving that for the courtroom, but I let the threat hang heavy in the air. "You're making a huge mistake, Alara." Preston hissed, his eyes blazing with fury. You can't prove anything. We have the best lawyer and we have the judge. You have nothing but your pathetic jealousy. You want to play that game? Dahlia recovered quickly, her voice regaining its cutting edge. We will drag your name through the mud. We will ruin your career before it even starts. You will wish you had taken the $10,000 and disappeared. The difference between us is that I have the truth, and the truth is backed by the law. I countered, feeling a surge of power. I won't be taking any $10,000. I'll see you in court, mother. The confrontation was brutal, ugly, and necessary. As I left the house for the last time, I knew I had sealed their fate. They were arrogant, but they were also scared, and that was exactly how I needed them to be when we faced each other again. The following week, the courtroom was packed. My legal battle had finally transformed into a public spectacle. The proceedings began, and the bias of Judge Alistair Kincaid was immediate and staggering. He continuously overruled Ava Sharma's objections and sustained every flimsy argument presented by Clayton Bell Preston's lawyer. When Ava attempted to introduce Elias Stone to testify about the contingent trust, Judge Kincaid summarily limited his testimony, citing irrelevant conjecture. It became immediately clear that Preston and Dahlia had indeed invested heavily in their defense, reaching far beyond the limits of the law. I watched Ava, calm and collected, quickly adjusting her strategy. We couldn't rely on the court's neutrality. We had to present evidence so overwhelming that the judge couldn't ignore it without exposing his own corruption. Ava switched tactics, immediately focusing the cross-examination on Preston's management of Vance Construction. She introduced the internal audit documents not to prove the illegal nature of the withdrawal, yet but simply to establish the movement of the $750,000 USD. Mr. Vance. Ava questioned, her tone calm but precise. Did you or did you not approve the transfer of $750,000 USD from the company's emergency reserve to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands in February of this year? Preston, looking confident thanks to Kincaid's clear favoritism, laughed slightly. As CEO, I authorize necessary liquidity transfers for strategic investments. That money was moved for a short-term high-yield opportunity. It was later returned with profit. Was the transfer documented as a loan or withdrawal? Ava pressed. It was documented internally, Preston replied vaguely. And did that strategic investment involve any other party whose name is also Vance other than yourself and your mother? Preston flushed, looking quickly at the judge, who stepped in swiftly. Objection sustained. Counsel stay relevant to the probate dispute. Ava, however, had planted the seed. She had established the financial movement and Preston's evasiveness. She then moved on to the existence of the contingent trust. Ava argued forcefully that David Vance's actions prior to death indicated a profound distrust of his beneficiaries, and that the court must recognize the possibility of an overriding, legally separate entity controlling the assets. Judge Kincaid nearly shouted his refusal to acknowledge the trust's validity unless the court was presented with an immediate signed trust document. A trust is not a magic wish, counsel, he admonished. Present the document or move on. His words were a clear signal to Preston and Dahlia. The court was fixed. They exchanged satisfied glances, believing they had successfully shut down my only way forward. But they hadn't anticipated the depth of my father's planning. I looked at Ava, and she gave me the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. It was time to play the final hand. Judge Kincaid looked straight at Preston and Dahlia, the weariness on his face no longer masking his impatience. Counselor Sharma, unless you have irrefutable evidence of duress regarding the will or the immediate notarized trust document, this court is prepared to rule in favor of the petitioners. His tone was a demand, a signal to wrap up the charade. This was their moment of triumph, fixed and secured. Preston smirked. Dahlia smiled thinly. Ava Sharma stood up slowly, her voice clear and ringing. Your Honor, we do not require the notarized trust document because the condition precedent for the contingent trust was never financial. It was based on the integrity of the family. and we now present the evidence that proves the condition of integrity was catastrophically violated. Ava moved quickly, presenting the Vance microSD card as evidence recovered from David Vance's personal effects, authenticated by Mitchell Hayes. While Clayton Bell sputtered objections, Ava played the audio log first. David Vance's voice, shaky but clear, detailing the illegal $750,000 USD transfer and his forced decision to secure assets. The entire courtroom fell silent. Preston, stripped of his composure, began yelling. Then Ava dropped the ultimate bomb. Your Honor, based on the findings in this Vance microSD card, we also present the DNA analysis and original adoption papers, which prove that Preston Vance is not the biological son of David Vance, and that Dahlia Vance concealed this fact while attempting to seize control of the Vance legacy. The reaction was pandemonium. Preston leapt to his feet, screaming denials. Dahlia gasped, her face turning ashen as she looked from me to Preston, the decades-long secret exposed in the cruelest way possible. Judge Kincaid pounded his gavel furiously, his compromised position instantly threatened. The evidence was now irrefutable, criminal in nature and public. He couldn't ignore it without destroying his career. After a tense recess, Judge Kincaid returned, his voice stiff and official. The evidence presented indicates substantial and probable fraud, as well as a complete breakdown in testamentary reliance. The contested will is hereby declared void and invalid. The matter of the contingent trust shall proceed immediately, and the matter of corporate fund abuse is hereby referred to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. The room erupted. Preston and Dahlia, suddenly alone and facing serious felony charges, were quickly escorted out by deputies. I won everything back: the 3 Mansard roof houses, the company, and my father's legacy. But as I walked out of the courtroom, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a quiet, absolute finality. I looked at the gold memorial pocket watch, the object that saved me, and realized the truth it held. The ultimate lesson was not about money or revenge. It was about defining family not by shared blood, but by shared integrity. Preston and Dahlia taught me that sometimes the people who share your name are the ones most eager to destroy you. They taught me that the only way to truly win against such calculated betrayal is to sever the connection completely and cleanly. I took the company, but I walked away from the history, the lies, and the poison. I cut them off completely. I never saw or spoke to either of them again, knowing they would face the very real, very harsh consequences of corporate fraud and theft under U.S. law. My life as Alara Vance, the daughter of David Vance, had finally begun, free from the shadow of my step-family's greed. The value of the story. The final word. The biggest lesson I took from this nightmare is the immense value of forensic integrity. It's easy to focus on the pain of betrayal, but the real power comes from recognizing that family betrayal often disguises itself as financial fraud. My father David didn't leave me money. He left me the tools to expose the lie, a cold, hard truth contained in a microSD card and a sentimental watch. The true victory was not acquiring the wealth, but achieving absolute closure. For anyone facing similar betrayal, remember this: the people who betray you for money will always prioritize their greed over your pain. You do not owe them forgiveness or reconciliation. You owe yourself the courage to find the irrefutable truth, expose the consequences, and most importantly, have the strength to cut them out entirely to protect your own peace. Justice isn't always about winning. Sometimes it's about making a clean, permanent cut. That, and always check your father's old pocket watch.